As people near the end of their lives, there will be many different encounters with challenging situations and difficult decisions. In this episode of the Church Help Desk, a team of doctors and caretakers help us understand the different scenarios in which these decisions occur and help us with the preparation necessary to handle them well.
So the first question, should you have a pulse form even though you have a living will, healthcare directive, and power of attorney? So you've got a living will, healthcare directive, power of attorney, but no pulse form. Do you need a pulse form? And so it should be on the very bottom.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. So the answer is complicated, but let me try to walk you through it. So all adults should name a healthcare agent and should have a living will. All adults. So your 18-year-old, as part of their graduation present, give them their advance directive form. They'll love you. But seriously, they need to name who speaks for them because now they can do that legally. A living will, like Dr. Smith said, is a wish list. It is, if I am in this situation, here are the things I would want to avoid. Here are the things I would want you to do. It's left purposefully vague because unless someone has some special gifting in this room, none of us know how we are going to die or when we are going to die or what the circumstances are going to be. And so it's left purposefully vague so that it can be translated by your healthcare agent at the time that it comes into effect. It is not a physician's order. It is a guideline. So most of the time, and this is where you usually get me, most of the time, if, let's say, your loved one who has an advance directive and has completed the living will portion stating that they would not want resuscitation attempted, goes into the ER and loses a pulse, the doctors and nurses there, in the absence of an order, have to start resuscitation. They don't have a choice. Okay? You can come in there, and if you're not the healthcare agent, you can waive all the paper you want. That advance directive is not a physician's order. And so the reason Dr. Smith and my boss, Dr. Harrington, and a few other doctors here in Arkansas and a bunch of other folks worked so hard and long with the Arkansas legislature is because we want our patients' wishes in that last year of life to be honored. And so for our patients who are in their last year of life, as best we can tell, if there are certain things they want, that pulsed form is signed by their physician. And so it is an order. So if an ambulance comes to their house, it is an order. The EMS has to follow it. So whether it says full code, DNR, don't take me back to the hospital, don't you put a feeding tube in me, whatever it says, it has to be followed because it's an order that's signed by either the patient or their surrogate decision maker and the physician. That is the power of the Arkansas Pulsed. A living will does not have those kinds of teeth. Okay.
People don't need that, do they, until they're at the end of life?
Yes.
Right.
So it's pulsed, and it's in the wording of the legislation, and I'll let Dr. Smith speak to that. So pulsed really is for folks who are, we feel, in that last 12 months of life. And I'll let you speak more to that.
Well, the wording is you wouldn't be surprised. Now, just like one legislator asked, well, how, that's kind of vague, isn't it? But Dr. Moore can, and the doctors, they can come up with an estimate that's pretty good. But if you are, said, well, I think I've got, let's just say I've got multiple sclerosis and I want a pulsed form. Well, I would argue with you because I would want to know, where are you? Because I have friends who've had multiple sclerosis for 35 years, You see how that would be inappropriate? Life's still pretty good. And she's not ready to say, it's moved along, but it's not time even for the pulsed. So that is a very important decision to be made with some discussion with the doctor. Prognosis, we're not perfect at that. We know how difficult that is. Dr. Moore is a lot better than most doctors. You know, the nurse is better than your cancer specialist, I mean, the bedside nurse, and many times better than anybody else. But so we understand how difficult it is to say how much time we've got left. Because all of us would like to know, but there are certain situations, again, if you've come in the hospital, I hope none of you have been in the hospital 6 times this year, this might be something to consider. You know, frailty, dementia, there's a lot of things, but just because you've got dementia, we all have a touch of that, I guess, but it's not time to get a pulsed.
So here's the next question. So if I need a physician or a doctor for a DNR, is the time to do that now, or when I need it late, or when it's needed later? So when do you, if you decide that you want to have a DNR recorded, when's the time to do that?
So I would say, first of all, if you know that that is your preference, regardless of how well you're doing, you're like, you know what? I'm at a point in my life where if God decides it's time for my heart to stop, I just want to go on to heaven. Please don't pound on my chest. Please don't put tubes down my throat. Please don't do that to me. And that is, like, I'm going to get to that point. The age keeps changing as I get older. But at some point, that will be my wish of, when it's my time, please let me go to heaven. If you know that is your wish, even though it might not be accompanied necessarily by documentation, the first thing to do is to talk to your healthcare agent and say, listen, if I lose a pulse and I die and an ambulance gets called, you as my healthcare agent have the power to say, please don't do this. This is not what my mom, dad, brother, sister, whoever wanted. Okay? So that's the first thing, is to let your healthcare agent know that that is your wish. If you have alternates, you need to also let them know that is your wish. The next thing I would do is I would let your doctors know. So most folks, once you get above the age of about 40, you have more than one doctor that you're seeing for a variety of issues, just because we're so specialized now. So I would start with your family doctor and say, hey doc, I know I'm here for my annual visit, but I just want to let you know that should this ever happen, I would desire this. And that way they can document that. And then you can tell your cardiologist, I want this. Tell your whoever, rheumatologist, I want this. Communicate with them that these are your wishes. And then when the time comes, there might be documentation to accompany that. But the healthcare agent's the most important person. I would say your family doctor is the next most important person who needs to know what your preference is.
Don't make that decision too soon. Another alternative is, if I get in that situation, give me X number of days. Don't get to the point where you're putting a tracheostomy, a feeding tube, and putting me on rehab and continuing this for months. Have that conversation. Many times, it doesn't matter if I have a lot of folks in their 90s, and yeah, they're still appropriate to have a limited a limited trial period. So the more robust we can be in that discussion, and again, 5 Wishes is another book that I brought along. We don't have time to go through all of that today. But there are ways to have a more robust discussion about this, because I'm uncomfortable by just saying, because I've got too many folks that are in their 80s and 90s. My goodness, they're contributing more to society than many of our 20-year-olds. You know, don't give it up too soon. For Paul, you know, I love that scripture in Philippians 1. Paul said, for me to continue to live will mean fruitful labor. And many of you are doing more ministry now than you've done any time in your life. So don't give it up too soon.
One of the other questions says, so can the signed document be superseded by someone else's word? If a different family member heard a parent or loved one say they wanted something different than what is in the signed document.
Okay, so I'll kind of take this 2 ways. And this is often where I get dragged into the mess because the team's like, so we have the healthcare power of attorney here, and they're saying one thing that's in line with the advance directive, but we have this daughter always from California. Always. Right?
They're the outlaw child.
Yes, who left Arkansas and went to California and now is coming back, and Sometimes there's a lot of mixed emotion. There's a lot of guilt for not being here. There's guilt over maybe a broken relationship. There's wanting to be in control now that I'm here because maybe it's the oldest child. So there's a lot that goes into that. And the team's like, well, this one's saying this one's saying this. What do we do? So I will say a lot of this comes down to who your physician is. There are some physicians who are so risk averse that if there is any rumbling of discontent, they're going to err on the side of continuing life-prolonging treatments. Now, most hospitals have an ethics team to kind of help with these sticky situations. That ethics team is sometimes helpful. That ethics team is sometimes not so helpful. So it's very dependent. Now, I've seen some docs kind of stick to their guns and say, okay, I have a document that's signed by the patient. I have a healthcare power of attorney who is agreeing with that document saying, this is what they want. And so we're going to call our risk management team to help us out here, but we're also going to proceed with the wishes of the patient. Those are actually quite rare. They're really rare. Especially when the patient has done the work ahead of time to talk to all the kids. And most of my patients that I have in continuity, they can identify the child or the spouse or the sibling who's going to have the problems. And they usually tell me, well, Dr. Moore, I know that we're saying all this, but my daughter is really going to have a hard time when it comes time. And that gives me a heads up, so then I can immediately interject myself into the situation and go to daughter and be like, hey, daughter, how are you doing? I'm Dr. Moore. I've known your dad for 3 years. We've had a lot of conversations about this. I can't imagine how difficult it is to see your dad going through this. But he told me time and time again this is what he wanted. So it really is worth doing the work ahead of time so that you can have it smoother sailing. And I would say the California seagulls, that's what we call them, because they come in and crap all over your plan. Can I say that here? Don't tell Dr. Harrington that I said that.
This is being recorded, Dr. Moore. I'm candid camera. Yeah.
So that is a rare situation, and I'll let Dr. Smith kind of talk about it. And that's kind of in my academic VA ivory tower settings, but I'll let you talk about the real world.
Well, it's the same. Get that signed document. Again, it's the obligation of the doctor to appoint a surrogate and write it down on the chart, but frankly, they don't like to do it, so it doesn't get done. Get a signed document that says, this is my durable power of attorney for health care, and then say, get everybody to read this. These are my wishes. And as I said last week, you know, I had a very well-known family, and there was a question about it. The doctor's question was, well, this older son is named as the agent. Can he make decisions in spite of what the two other children want? And I said, yes, he can. So he can legally. Now, he may have to deal with conflict for the rest of his life, but that's why Mama appointed him, was because he was man enough to do it. So pick it out, and then I have no obligation. I have to tell the family, I'm sorry, but this is the legal thing that I have to go by these wishes of that person that they wrote down there. Mm-hmm. And if you want to go to court, that's fine. If you can find a judge, that's fine. But I have to go by this mandate.
One of the other questions we have, it says, for those of us that have no family and have named the foundation as our agent, how does that work? Who and how do you do that? Shelley, do you want to, since Shelley's the first line of defense in that world, do you want to kind of speak to that when we're listed as an agent?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing is that document. That's what I go by. The doctor's going to ask me for that. And I've dealt with Dr. Smith many of times on occasions like this, and we just really need that in hand. And I, personally know most of the people that we take care of, and so I know them personally. But it's still, that piece of paper helps me so much be able to know exactly what the wishes were, and then I can just hand that over to the doctor. I may know personally, that the reasons that we're doing what we're doing, but that paper really is so important. So if I could say anything, just be proactive and make sure not only is that paper filled out and signed, is that it's accurate? Like, is it still in force? Have you done it? Have you looked at it? Is it still what your belief is or what you want, what your wishes are? So that's what I would say for
Yeah,
that. And if you want to add to that.
Yeah, and those of you that have dealt with Shelley, you kind of understand, and David may have something to add in this regard, that have dealt with the foundation for an extended period of time. Typically, someone from the foundation has been in regular contact with you, whether that's been David or Shelley, over the years. And oftentimes we're aware, even if we're not the healthcare power of attorney, we're aware of who is listed, and we're often also aware of your wishes. And so Shelley's here to help navigate those, and to the extent that you do reach a capacity where you're not able to make decisions, not only is Shelley there oftentimes in a legal capacity, but she is there, as was mentioned in the question, as the proxy for a family member, if you will, to work with those physicians and navigate those matters.
And I'm not paid for this, but I'll tell you, I've had experiences with both of them. They're better than 90 to 95% of all the people I've ever seen. And I didn't get paid for any of this. They know their people better. They care about them. They will make sure everything is done right. And again, I'm just an outsider saying this, and I won't maybe never see them again, but wow, they do an incredible job. And they're not, I thought at first, I didn't know what the foundation's about. I thought, hey, these are the folks who are going to give you all their inheritance. They've got folks that don't have a thing, and they still go to that nth degree. So I just want to really put a plug out for them.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. David, do you want to add something to that?
Well, the only thing I would say is, I think, our attitude has been, we're the son and daughter. I mean, we're the family. And Shelley's right in the sense of you can know something about the person, but you don't know what you're going to have to deal with at the end of life. I think of a guy from Mount Ida who called me one day, and he said, now, man, you don't have to do anything for me, but my wife, if I die, you got to take care of her. And we did. She needed a lot of help. But when he got in trouble, he was in St. Joseph's Hospital in Hot Springs. I was on the phone every day with the doctor deciding, do we wean him or not? Do we take him off the vent or not? And from, the way I looked at it, you're just like a son. You're saying, what would I do if this were my parent? And I'm leaning on these doctors saying, tell me, what are his odds? What are his chances? Just like I think a son would do. I'd be asking the same questions about, that person's, I'd be asking about my mom. What are her chances? What's good about this? What's not good about this? Just to make a good decision. And through the years, I've tried to say to people, you're at a point where if you don't have somebody you trust to do this, the foundation, they don't really want to do that. Trust me, these folks do not want to make medical decisions. But they'll do it if they have to because they know you need help. And of all people, they are the most loving people I know to make those decisions. So, yeah.
Another question we had come in, when do you take your loved one to the physician to be declared incompetent? If you think you've reached that point. We got that question.
So, and I'm going to get the lawyer in here too. So, competence is a legal term. A doctor cannot declare your loved one or you incompetent. What I can look at is what we call decisional capacity. So decisional capacity is, for this decision that I need made right now, does this patient understand the risks, the benefits, the alternatives? Can they articulate a decision and demonstrate reasoning? Any doctor can determine capacity, but often they will call psychiatry or maybe an ethics team or something like that in really sticky situations. All I can determine is in that moment. So I have some patients who in the morning, when I first see them and they're fresh, they have capacity to make decisions. When I see them in the afternoon, I can ask them the same question. They're somewhere else, and they can't do that. So all a doctor can decide is decisional capacity. When you're a caregiver, and maybe you're dealing with a loved one who has dementia or progressive strokes or something like that, and you're really getting to the point where your loved one on a chronic basis is not able to make decisions for themselves, that is a question of competence, sort of global competence. That is determined through a legal proceeding for guardianship. So that is a legal proceeding where a judge reviews everything and then determines, okay, globally, this person cannot make decisions for themselves. They need to have a court-appointed guardian. Often it's a family member who's petitioning the court to be the guardian, so that means you could put your loved one in a nursing home even if they say they don't want to go, those kinds of things. So that is a legal proceeding. Sometimes doctors help in that by providing documentation or maybe even witness in a court situation if it's a particularly tenuous situation. But I can't declare anyone incompetent. I cannot say you're the guardian. The other thing about guardianship, which is why I want the lawyer to weigh in, is you have to look at what is the scope of guardianship. So some guardians are allowed to help make financial decisions, allowed to put their loved one in a nursing home or a long-term care facility, can kind of do, have access to their bank accounts, have access to their medical records, do all of that. But they may not have the scope to make decisions regarding life-sustaining treatments. The other thing is often if the patient, while they still had capacity, signed a healthcare power of attorney, that healthcare power of attorney most of the time supersedes guardianships for decisions about life-sustaining treatments. So are we a DNR? Do we want to be on a ventilator? Those kinds of things. So it gets really tricky when we're talking about end-of-life stuff, but sometimes, especially with dementia patients, it becomes essential in order for loved ones to take care of their loved one when they can no longer make decisions for themselves. And I will kick it over.
Right. So the legal capacity thing, there's a legal test. It's in Arkansas court cases. And so a simplified version of that is, do you know what you have, where it's going, and why? And that's kind of the simplified version of that. But Arkansas law is a little bit crazy. If you've ever heard me talk about this, we also have law that says sanity is not required. It only takes a lucid moment. And so I don't know what that means, and I can't argue that. I could argue that every one of us have non-lucid moments every day. So my solution to that is there's just there seems to be this kind of gray area. I don't know, but I know that there's certain presumptions depending on the situation that the court will find, and my advice is get your documents in place before there's a question of lucidity, because that's going to be very, very hard to prove, and it's going to be a nasty battle. If you're in court trying to prove whether or not somebody was lucid, it's not a good situation. So get your documents in place and make sure that you kind of review those and reinforce what you did then many, many times over. Because if you have that seagull daughter out in California, they're the ones that are going to challenge something that the son went with you to the lawyer to draw up. So if it's something that's consistent, kind of consistent over the years, that's what you want. And so the other part that we talked about earlier that I was going to also briefly mention was about the different forms. To name a healthcare agent, I think, is essential. The pulse comes at later in life. And the reason why the healthcare agent is essential, they can sign one of those pulse forms. So you don't have to have a pulse form now. Just name the right person now as your agent, and then they can sign one of those when the time comes and they can need to make that decision. So anyway.
We worry about dementia. My psychiatrist son, at my last physical examination 2 weeks ago, had the internist give me, is it a mock?
Yes.
I passed. I was so happy. But he knows that's one of the greatest fears I have. And because I've got to say, hey, I'm out of this doctoring business when I get that. So ask your doctor about that. That'll help.
Well, I have a question. I've been through cognicy tests with people through the years. Nurses, other people like that do them for insurance companies and long-term care policies and things like that. When you go into rehab, they do the same thing. Just they check in to see how competent you are. How could somebody get a cognicy test without having to be in that situation? Is it available?
So, especially if the concern is dementia. It's harder to do. Here in Central Arkansas, typically they are done by psychologists rather than psychiatrists, just because psychiatrists are few and far between. For any of you who have struggled with mental health issues with your congregants or other family members or anything, it's hard to find good psychiatrists. So often there can be a referral process from your primary care to go for what we call neurocognitive testing. So they test a variety of issues. And if there are concerns about dementia, if there's concerns about, dad's driving all around town all day and he's forgetting where he's going. He's lived here his whole life. If there are those kinds of concerns, usually you start with neurocognitive testing. So not only can they identify deficits, but they can also kind of tell you where we are. The other thing to do is sometimes what looks a whole lot like dementia is just they're medically sick. And so sometimes they need to go to their GP and get a workup. And maybe their diabetes is not as well controlled as we thought, or their blood pressure is not as well controlled as we thought. And then all of us, I'm getting dangerously close to 40, but I have my senior moments where I walk into a room. I have a 4-year-old, and she's aging me.
Sleep deprivation.
Yeah, and I'm telling you. And so I will walk into a room, and I'll be like, that doesn't mean I have dementia. It just means that I'm the mother of a toddler. And so my mother also is deathly afraid of dementia because she saw a grandmother struggle with it for several years. And so anytime she walks into a room and can't remember what she's there for, she's calling me almost in tears, like, what's happening? It's like, Mom, you're 63. It happens. So and she doesn't take that, but usually neurocognitive testing is the place to start, and it can identify what areas we're lacking in. I will say, for dementia, social graces leave last. So that little old lady in your church who just seems to start being kind of odd, but you can ask her, and she'll be like, oh, how are you, sweetie? How are you doing? And you'll notice a lot more sweeties and honeys, and because the social graces go last. They're good Southern girls, they're good Southern boys. They can still say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, good morning, how are you? Isn't it good to be in the house of the Lord? And if you go to their house, the stove's still on. And so that's another thing to watch out for among each other, is that when they start, something's not right, sometimes hearing it from a pastor or a friend at church or another minister can really kind of say, I'm concerned about you, and I will even drive you to Little Rock so you don't have to drive in that traffic, and let's go get this checked out. And that could be really helpful.
Yeah, Dr. Moore, we call it mental hard drive space. You put something on the front and something's going to fall off the back. It's just kind of math. Shelley, what kind of practical things do people need help with that they tend not to think about in advance? Are there practical things you see where you say, goodness, I wish we would have thought to talk about this in advance?
Well, I think a lot of times people don't think about this too when they're getting older and they have a house and it's such a burden, honestly, but they don't want to leave their home. And that is so hard. I've got great examples of people that have done that and packed up their things and moved to a different place and are doing well and love it where they're at. But then I have ones that they just refuse to do that. And so I feel like that's probably number one thing. Just realize that we can't take these things with us. We are going to go to heaven and we won't need materialistic things anymore. And so I feel like if people can realize that and kind of get that out of their head, that they could actually, it's just a burden that they won't have to deal with later if they could go ahead and realize they're at the point where they need to downsize. Go ahead and downsize if you need to. And I promise it'll be a lot lighter load. That's probably one of the hardest things to do. People just don't want to let go, of their items. And even as a Christian, we get attached to our things here on earth. And so if you could realize that and actually move somewhere where it's easier to get around, just like Parkway Village is an example, they just, the facility itself is set up all in one place, and there's lots of different cares. There's independent care, there's assisted living, there's memory, there's nursing home, there's a doctor out there. There's everything that you could possibly need usually in one area, and not all of them are set up like that, but just recognizing when it's time. And I think the overwhelming part is because you've lived in that house for probably 50 or 60 years, and there's just so much, and you don't know where to start. But what I always tell them is, you can start, just do one room one room, start on one room, and don't look at the big picture. Just get one room done. And we have resources that we can come in and they can help them pack and help them move. So those are all things that we can help you with if that's something that you decide you need to do.
And so Shelley mentioned Parkway Village again in your packet is just a sample of pricing. This isn't,
Just a
again,
sample.
used as an advertisement of any sort. It's just to help you begin to think about the financial decisions and the ramifications of progressing through independent assisted and nursing care. And so, go ahead, Shelley.
I will say this too, and some people decide that they do want to stay in their home and they want to have care in their home, and that's okay. But just know when you do that, it's going to be about double the cost, okay? Because especially if you have to have 24/7 care, it's going to be very expensive, and you also don't have the multiple people that you'll need coming in. If someone's sick, you have a caregiver that can't make it that day. Those are things that you need to think about when you hire someone. And we usually go with an agency just because I can call that agency and say, okay, they said they couldn't make it today. Can you get someone else out there as soon as possible? And so they will. I can get someone. But if I just had an individual that I used, then I would be just scrambling trying to find someone to be there for them. So it's just very important to think about those things ahead of time.
David, do you mind sharing either some examples of how you've seen folks finish well in this process, whether those are normal people doing extraordinary measures or extraordinary people doing some basic measures? But do you have some examples you can share with us?
Sure. I think I feel very fortunate that a lot of the people I've dealt with have finished well. When I was a pastor, I dealt with people at this level. At the foundation, I dealt with people at this level. Just great people all over the state. And most of them really did a great job finishing well. Dr. Smith was at Emmanuel this year doing a program for me, and he mentioned one of the great moments of his life as a palliative doctor was being in Monica Keithley's room when we were all singing hymns and praying and celebrating, even unplugging her at that point. And what a way to go, and what a blessed life. But I was just then trying to think, what are the common denominators among people that have finished well? First of all, I think they stay active. They're busy, not only relationally, socializing with people. As you get older and you don't feel good, you don't want to get out and do much. That's when you need it the most. That's when you need to be out socializing with people. You've lost your spouse. You just want to be alone. No, you need to be out with people. Very important. Just being physically active, exercising. I was thinking about a lady that used to walk every morning 3 miles every day of the week. Well, when she was 90 years old, she started having strokes. She had 3 strokes in a row, and it barely affected her because she was in such great physical shape. So stay active. Stay committed to the Lord and to the church. My mom was in South Alabama, and she was, I'd call her the patron saint of the senior adults there. She was always the senior adult on every pastor committee, and, they just loved my mom because she's so good at everything, doing all the stuff she did. We moved her up here. She quit driving. Another story, my mother said, I'm not going to drive in the city, and my wife said, Mom, you'll be at Parkway Village and, the Kroger and everything will be right. Don't you want to drive? I said, shut up, Becky. If Mother will give up her car, let her give it up. And she did, and we're glad she did, and Mother's glad she did too. But anyway, my mother, through these 11 years, has been discouraged sometimes because she goes, I just don't feel like I'm doing anything for the Lord. I'm going, Mom, you're in a Sunday school class, and you're very active at church. You attend all the Sunday school meetings. You're in WMU. You go to all of their meetings. You're in the prayer shawl ministry every week. You're probably the best knitter they have. I just started going through all the things she's doing, and she goes, well, I just don't feel like it's in. I said, you started a prayer meeting in your apartment on Wednesday nights? Come on, Mom. What do you think? But the point is, she's still committed. She's 93 and a half years old and still wants to be doing something for the Lord, and I think that's kept her healthy and happy. Thirdly, I would say always be positive. Be very positive. I had a friend who died last night. Many of you know him, Ed Simpson. And, this guy has been through an incredible life. I've known a lot of people who've had problems in life, but nobody like Ed Simpson. He's the most modern day Job I know in terms of what he's faced in life. Lost his wife and 3 children earlier in life, and then in the last few years he's had all these problems with cancer and issues coming up in his life. And they gave him a chemo drug, and he started losing his sight. And they're going, it can't be that, because only 1 out of 500,000 people that ever happens. He's the 1 out of 500,000, apparently. But the point is, he just had so much on him. Through the whole ordeal, he's been so positive and so happy, and just doing and thinking things through. He worked out his funeral and all that stuff. But just the point is, he's just very, very positive. So, the doctors tell me that one of the best things in dealing with cancer is your attitude. I hear that a lot from docs. So anyway, be positive. And maybe one other thing, just continue to be generous. I think as people get older, we have the ability to be more and more generous with ourselves. As you scale down, you can give away jewelry and furniture and things to your kids, and it's always fun to see them while you're alive, give things to them and see them enjoy it now. We have people here like the Bonners, who I've worked with for years, and just great, great human beings, but these folks lived, I knew them in Pine Bluff. They lived frugally. They lived in a very, modern house, but just a plain house, nothing. They could have lived in a much nicer home, drove a regular car, I call it a regular car, and just lived a regular life and loved the Lord and saved their money and invested it well. And then God put it on their heart one day to, bless Camp Siloam and help us build a dining hall, which we desperately needed, or they're going to shut us down. Think about what that means to them, not just to Camp Siloam, what that's done in their lives. What a blessing, and how that's made them happy and give them, productive. I was being introduced years ago for a weekend, and this guy a lawyer got up to introduce me, and he said, I just can't imagine how hard David's job is, because he said, he's trying to get people to give things away, and I know that's very, very hard. And I'm laughing to myself thinking, this guy has no idea what generous people are like. He has no idea. People who love to give, don't they? And they have fun doing it, and they live longer. Do you know that we did a study several years ago, people who are charitable live longer than people who are not. And the way we proved it statistically was, they did a study of people with insurance, with insurance and without. People with insurance lived so many years longer than people without insurance. People with commercial annuities lived longer than people who just had life insurance. And then we compared people with charitable gift annuities and people who had regular commercial annuities. And like at the age of 90, you'd live like 3.5 years longer if you were charitable. The point is, it makes a difference. Be happy and be generous and be positive and all those things. And I think you live long. And I guess there are times when you can't control Alzheimer's, and there's some things that may take you out of your mind where you can't do it. But what did Paul say? In as much as it depends on you, live at peace with all men. In as much as it depends on you, finish well. And wear one of Shelley's little bracelets that says "Finish well."
That's right. Well, and I think we'll finish there. And I'm going to have Marcus Brown. Marcus is the team leader for the church health team. Our staff has an opportunity to work with him very closely. I'm going to have Marcus come up and dismiss us in prayer. The last thing I want to draw your attention to, and this is something David prepared years ago, on page 9 of the Survivor Guide, it's a page that says, what can you do now for those who follow you? And so it's some step-by-step things of how you can finish well, things you can prepare now, including many of the documents we've talked about, to how you can set up where those that survive you can carry out your wishes.